You are listening to CPA Career Paths Podcast with Rosie Flaherty, CPA MSA. This is episode number 32. We continue the conversation with Connor to explore more about his CPA journey. What else that you face at the beginning when you start your own practice?
I mean, everything. You face everything. I mean, what you end up finding out kind of firsthand is something like that is, the first kind of big changes you go from, I don't have a paycheck coming in regularly, right? So now suddenly this knowing I'm going to get paid in a couple weeks or whatever, that's gone. And as soon as you go into the open market, congratulations, you are now playing the most competitive game on the planet, which is capitalism. You have to learn to look out for yourself. You are the only one that will take ownership of ensuring that you get paid. Because if you don't advocate for yourself, I can guarantee you that the other person on the side, business, whatever, whoever you're doing business with, will be more than happy to not pay you if you don't decide to kind of step up and say, hey, here's what's going on, setting up payment terms, following up on collections. And that's for a lot of new businesses that we deal with, that's something that they kind of struggle with, is that being adamant about you've got to pay me, because it's scary when you're starting out. Your insecurities, every negative kind of part of yourself will come out in full force when you start this process of, am I worth the money that I'm charging to somebody else? Your self-doubt will quickly say, no, you're not. You shouldn't be charging that much. You have no idea on the other side. They don't see all this. They're more than willing to, pay for it, but you end up having to become an advocate for yourself. And that was one of the big challenges, was figuring out, how do I price stuff? How do I make sure I get paid? And how do I protect myself? Thankfully, I'd had some previous experience learning from the partner that I'd worked for how they kind of structured things, how they handled and did all that. But when you start dealing with small businesses, individuals, you're doing freelance work, it gets kind of turns into the Wild West to a certain extent. And then probably the other biggest thing that I've talked to people about, and from that experience, is that when you go freelance, when you start a business, when you go self-employed or you do something, your successes are your own. You get to own all of the success that you have from the work that you've done. All of your failures are also your own, which means every weakness in your personality, all of your shortcomings, the things you're not good at, the things you don't know how to do, those are also yours, and you are going to have to confront those. And it is not a pleasant process to go through a project, completely foobar it, and realize that you have no one else to blame. It is entirely you and the decisions that you made. And what I've noticed with a lot of people starting out, one of the kind of big make or break things is, can you handle that introspective process of, I need to be better at this, or I know I'm not good at this thing. I need to either find someone to do it, or I need to be more disciplined in what I'm doing. And when you're kind of caught off guard by it, it sucks. It really does. Your first engagement where the client's not happy just sucks. You feel terrible because you have, you could go from a manager position at a large firm that when there were problems, you could, if you wanted to, rationalize and say, well, it was the team, or it was, the partner, or it was someone else. I wasn't given the resources to adequately do this. You go out on your own and you're doing your own thing. You have literally no one to blame but yourself. Some people still won't do it. Oftentimes their operations, their businesses, they may muddle along for a while. They won't have the growth that they want, or it'll go under because they just can't handle that fact. But those that are able to ultimately forge themselves in the fire of this process, of the adversity that you're going to face, you come out on the other side better and more competitive compared to people that just haven't. I would 100% be willing to say that from starting the business, everything that we've done up to this point, you could have 20 years of experience as a manager at other businesses and stuff like that. I still probably know more than you.
Yeah, as you said, you don't know until you do it. And if you just work as a manager, you just know the manager work only. You don't have any experience about running the whole picture of a practice. Yeah. So that's very different experience.
Yeah, you're somewhat responsible for budgeting, but you're not responsible for finding the work that's going to be performed, for ensuring that the contracts are set up in such a way to protect yourself and ensure that you get paid, to make sure that you're not underbidding for the work, to make sure that the client's going to pay you, to make sure that, the team, you may have to deal with this as a manager, but that your employees have the resources that they need, to make sure that you have enough cash on hand so that you don't run into problems with payroll, that you've got appropriate tech stacks in place to make sure that everyone's got the project management systems, the CRMs, all that other stuff that when you move into an organization is most of the time in place. You got to come up with all that yourself, put it into place, and understand why is this stuff or why are we using it in the beginning? You have to kind of figure out what is the purpose of doing these things. How do I then forecast my own cash flows? Most of the time that's not really something. When you're just working somewhere, you're never worried about your paycheck bouncing, really, ever, unless you're in a terrible situation, and then if that happens, there's some serious problems, and you should go reach out to the Department of Labor. But it's just so much of it. You go from, I always joke that I went from the bottom of the totem pole to the top. There was no in between, and I remember constantly, even now, thinking back when I was working as a staff of, man, why is the partner doing this, or why do we have these things happening? And then as I was self-employed, and then now as one of the managing partners and managing my own work, sitting there going, all right, I get it. I get why he was doing that. I get what was going on. I see why. Because there's so much that went on until you're at that point. You just don't understand the full dynamics of how the organization works from the bottom all the way through to the top, and you just end up sitting there going, damn it, I see why I could never get a hold of him, because he was constantly in meetings or constantly sending emails and stuff like that. All right, I see why there were delays in this or that, because there's all this other stuff going on that you just have no idea about. Why are they constantly at these meetings and talking to people, and then now suddenly you're responsible for getting your own work, and you realize, if I'm not out talking to people, I'm not out building those relationships and pulling in business, we're not going to have work, and now I'm really going to be worried about payroll. And there's just so much that kind of comes crashing in, where you go, all right, I get it. I get why we were having these, and then if you're able to learn from it, you make things better than what you've seen. I always joke that my tax partner had worked at quite a few firms before he had joined up with me. He was a manager at RSM. They're huge. He ended up getting tired of the insane hours that he was working. I had reached out and said, I need someone to do tax work. Because when I did my own return for my first year in business and didn't understand why $0 of net income for the year, I had an $1,800 tax bill, and what are self-employment taxes? That's when I went, all right, I got some weaknesses in my in my professional competencies here, and that sucks. But we had joined up, and he's worked at quite a few firms, has seen how they do things, and so he's got a lot of previous firm experience to pull from. And I always jokingly say, and I knew nothing before we got started, so I come through it with a very clear view, because I have no preconceived notions, because I didn't see anything.
You're so funny.
Spent a lot of time working on that too.
Wow. I want to know 3 to 5 main tips that you could provide to people who are just about to start their practice.
Well, I learned from the Leadership Academy that apparently you can purchase pre-existing practices, which totally blew my mind. I was like, wait a minute, I could have done that? I mean, I didn't have the money when I was starting out anyway. And I was like, well, that's a thing. I mean, the big thing to anyone interested in going self-employed, and this goes beyond just starting your own public accounting gig, whether it's really anything. I end up having a lot of similar discussions with graphic design businesses or anyone providing services or starting their own thing. I mean, when you do that, you don't have the luxury of saying, well, I'm not really good at sales or I'm not really good at this. Because unfortunately, the free market that we're in, and despite what some people will say, it is a free market. Particularly if you're starting out, we're not dealing with big multinational corporations here. We're dealing with your local small businesses. That is very much a free market. I've seen it firsthand. You don't have the luxury of saying, "Well, I'm not a good salesperson." Well, if you're not going to sell yourself, who will? If you don't have sales coming in, then what are you planning on doing? Who are you planning on working for? Or I don't like handling the overseeing what the work that's being done. It's like, well, you're ultimately responsible. Every aspect of the business ends up being your responsibility, and whether you want to succeed or fail is going to be largely dependent on, particularly if it's your sixth business that you're starting and you already know your thing. Everything I'm saying here is going to be old news. You've learned it already. But when you're getting started, you have to know that every area, whether it's sales for your business, operations for your business, accounting for your business, the finances of the business, the IT infrastructure for the business, all of that ends up being your responsibility to handle. And you don't have the luxury of kind of just washing your hands off and saying, I don't want to deal with it. I don't think it's needed. Maybe you can limp through it for a while. I can guarantee you that every business out there that I talk to that hasn't done accounting work for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it costs them. It costs them a lot. Their inattentiveness, not knowing how much they're making or losing, it ends up costing them a good amount of money, first in lost profit, and then what they end up having to pay us to fix and put things together. But you have to understand that ultimately you are responsible for everything. No one's going to say, you need to get up at 7 a.m. to go do this stuff, or that, hey, you need to go do these collections calls, or hey, you need to go do this. It's all on you. And it's your internal discipline for whether you follow up on things, whether you're doing research to figure out how to offer new services, new products, whatever. All of that comes down to you. No one's going to really hold your hand through it. There's people out there that'll help. There are services, but at its core, you have to do the work yourself to get things moving and to do it. And if you don't, you're going to go out of business. I mean, that's the cut and dry of it, that if you don't do these things, and it can sound harsh to some people, and I've had some people say that, is it really that harsh? Like, that free market can be brutal when you're unprepared for what's going to happen, and it can have real consequences. We have had clients come to us that neglected a lot of these areas, and the only guidance we can give them is, you need to go talk to a bankruptcy attorney because you're going out of business. There is no salvaging or saving what you've done. You hired people to go do some things and then keep an eye on them. Guess what? They're stealing from you because you just gave them open access to everything. You didn't do your due diligence. You're not watching to make sure, and you're out tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's a real example we've had of some clients. You've got to be responsible for everything until you find the people that you can trust. And even then, trust but verify. Make sure you're still keeping an eye on things to make sure that stuff's going accordingly. I had an original point I was trying to make. I kind of I started rambling there a little bit, but I mean, at its core, for anyone getting ready to start, just be prepared. You got to handle all of it. It's all on you. And when it works, it's great because it is an achievement that nobody can take away from you. When you build a business up, when you've got this thing that you've built with your bare hands, nobody can say, well, you didn't really do that, or, well, it's just your other blah, blah, blah. Nope, that's your achievement. You get to bask in the glory of, I have built this thing and it is successful, and you get to strut around like you're all that. And on the flip side, it will tank if you don't do the due diligence, and you have no one to blame but yourself.
I feel like you just provide briefly a picture about what people are going to deal with if they're going to go out and do their own practice. A lot of things that you need to worry about, a lot of things you need to prepare for it. I think a lot of people worry about technology because cybersecurity is just such a huge deal right now. And with as a small practice, a small firm, how do you prepare yourself with all the technology growth and with all the cybersecurity problems that you can face with?
A lot of it comes into in areas where you can kind of offload part of that responsibility onto a company that, let's face it, knows it better than you. That is something that I advise a lot. For most small businesses, small practices, like maintaining your own server system, right? I don't really trust any of my clients with their own IT security infrastructure. I have far more faith in a company like Microsoft or Google that when it comes to the actual storage and maintenance of files, keeping it secure, as opposed to someone who has a file server set up in their office that may or may not be properly configured with the appropriate firewalls and controls over, outside intrusion, that, then they get hit from an outside source who's just going along and trying to ping whatever, open ports that they can find. I have more faith that Google can probably keep their servers secure from outside influence than most of us can. That's what they got far more resources. They got a whole lot more expertise. I oftentimes don't place faith in a whole lot of things, but I've got some faith that they can manage stuff better. A lot of it comes down to, a lot of it really is common sense. Two-factor authentication. Don't click on stupid stuff. Have critical thinking when you're looking through your emails. Somebody sends you something you're not expecting to see an email. Don't just click on it. They say, oh, I was expecting, I've got a package for you, or I need some info, whatever. Use your critical thinking around, does the context of this make sense? Am I expecting a client is going to be emailing me, this thing? It never hurts to double check and say, hey, are you actually, sending this to me? Don't assume that just because you're small that, you're not going to get, no one's going to pay attention to you, but do what you can to kind of minimize your exposure. Anytime you take things in-house as a small business, a small practice, the more you're self-managing, if you don't have the funds to pay someone who knows what they're doing, you open yourself up to more risk. There's plenty of services out there that you can use to set up domain administration, email, all that good stuff that helps keep it secure, and you can rely on the larger players in the field to actually do their portion and help keep you safe. I do recommend for anyone that we actually have just finished getting ours in place, data backups as well. This is one of the few times where I say do have your own infrastructure, but once you start to get information that you can't lose, ransomware is one of the biggest risks, right? Just if you go through, you've got something set up, you're doing your thing, and just imagine if all of your company files ended up getting encrypted and you couldn't get into them, could you be in business tomorrow? How bad would that be? Would you then have to send emails out that basically say, sorry, we have lost everything, either resend it or, we've lost all of this confidential information. Besides the reputation loss you're going to face, it's just going to be bad. Make sure that your employees aren't doing stupid things if you've got employees. A lot of it does come down to common sense. Using, Gmail accounts or Workspace or other hosted ones, they usually have pretty good spam filters, right? You're not going to see, don't go looking through your spam folder for emails that you receive. Go, I wonder what's going on here. Well, then everything that happens from that point forward, congratulations, your actions have consequences. Why did you go in your spam folder? That's kind of it. But it just does come down to, what makes sense, what maybe, does everything coming through and an understanding of still having those safeguards, because if you become, say, a big enough deal that a dedicated hostile party is directly targeting you with a sophisticated phishing scheme, you're gonna be in trouble. A lot of times it comes down to if you're a big enough target where you've got enough information out there and you've attracted the attention of um, illicit parties, if they put enough time and effort in, they may be able to get you. And then what does it look like once they nail what's happened? There's a lot of sophisticated phishing schemes that you can read about online where they will identify an executive, put together a very in-depth kind of profile, and pose as somebody else, and all of it checks out, and then they get hit because with enough time and effort, as I have told some clients, say in the news that there's state-sponsored hackers and stuff like that, and I've had some clients where I say, well, you just need to make sure that you're prepared for something like that, because let's face it, if China wants to hack you with their resources, you are not going to win that fight. If the Russians or the Iranian, whatever reason, you're a dedicated enough target and there is state money behind it, the most you can do is make sure you've got processes in place to protect you, to help pick up the pieces after the fact, because it kind of turns into the question of that. You get hit with ransomware and you go, whatever, we're just going to upload tomorrow's backup and fix the hole that we had. All right, not a big deal. Versus, they've decided to hit you because of, whatever you do or something like that. You just never know. I guess it's kind of the long-winded way of, for a lot of the tech stuff, just it kind of boils down to don't be dumb. that honest to God is a lot of it is just exercise critical thinking anytime you're dealing with. I mean, email's the biggest one where most businesses get hacked. It's not like in the movies where they have plugged a laptop into your outside whatever and are if somebody is so dedicated to go after you, they have somebody in your office building to do that. I don't know what you've done or who you've pissed off, but that's a whole separate ball game. Most of it is just email phishing attempts, and then it's automated from there. And so much of it is defeated by just do you have your employees doing the phishing training and being aware for stuff and letting them know, I'm literally never going to tell you to do this, or I will never ask you for hey, go get these checks for me or give me this info. And a lot of it comes down to just the critical thinking of everyone involved.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, that's all the phishing emails. It could be challenging for some people because it just say urgency. We need to do it now. We need to pay the invoice now when you do not have any invoice. So a lot of critical thinking, that's really important.
And it's always fun when you tell someone. I've had clients that go, I'm just not that tech inclined, or I don't really want to deal with all that stuff. It's like, I hate to break it to you, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you like dealing with it or don't, or you don't think it's a big deal. The reality of the situation is, if this happens, you're going to be in a world of hurt, and this is what's going to happen. It has nothing to do with whether you're tech-minded or not. In fact, the less tech-minded you are, the worse it's going to be, and the worse the consequences will be. I'm not, I've had some individuals I've had conversations with. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Like, if if for whatever reason you go like willfully against it, these are your actions will have consequences. That is how this works. If I don't take this stuff seriously or don't exercise critical thinking, I can lose my business. I mean, that is what it can boil down to. And sometimes you've got to put it in such harsh terms for people that they never expect when they're talking to their accountant at times to say it. Like, hate to break it to you, I don't really care. This is the reality of the situation. They go, well, what do you mean? I'm trying to save you from yourself here by explaining you got to take it seriously. I am so sorry.
Ooh, all the fun there when you have to deal with clients, huh?
Yeah. Which is, going back to someone starting their own practice.